Good day. Nothing perhaps illustrates better the chaotic state of decision-making in Washington than the fact that at the same time as President Biden of the United States telephoned President Xi Jinping of China to propose an improvement in relations, or at least a stabilization in relations, other officials of the US government, the same US government which President Biden supposedly heads, appear to be pressing forward with ideas of changing the name of Taiwan's mission to the United States to the Taiwan Representative Office. This is, of course, one step below an embassy and is bound to infuriate China if it ever happens. So we see Biden trying to improve relations, or at least saying he does, to Xi Jinping and telephoning Xi Jinping to try to do that, at the same time as other US officials are working in the diametrically opposite direction. Moreover, all the indications are that it is these other officials who still hanker for some kind of confrontation with China who are in the ascendant and who will eventually prevail over those other officials, which presumably include the president himself, who are becoming increasingly alarmed about the deterioration of the situation with Beijing and who want at least to calm or stabilize things. How do we know that there are, in fact, talks about upgrading the status of Taiwan's mission in the United States? Well, we've had that confirmation in a long article from the Financial Times, which I'm going to read in part because it is behind a paywall. And it reads as follows. Washington risks Beijing's ire over proposal to rename Taiwan's US office. The Biden administration is moving towards allowing Taipei to change the name of its representative office in Washington to include the word Taiwan, a move likely to trigger an angry response from Beijing. Multiple people briefed on internal US discussions said Washington was seriously considering a request from Taiwan to change the name of its mission in the US capital from Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, TECRO, to Taiwan Representative Office. Kurt Campbell, White House Asia advisor, has backed the change, according to two people with knowledge of the discussions. One said the request had wide support inside the National Security Council and from State Department Asia officials. A final decision has not been made and would require President Joe Biden to sign an executive order, said people briefed on the matter. Changing the name of the office would anger China, which views Taiwan as part of its sovereign territory, and pile more pressure on increasingly fraught relations between Washington and Beijing. Now, can I just say that when one reads all about this, about all these anonymous officials rushing off to the Financial Times and briefing them about this move, and all of this happening simultaneously with the President of the United States telephoning the Chinese president and saying that he wants to stabilize relations, well, you can see that some people in the Washington bureaucracy are once more up to their old games of sabotaging what the president is trying to do. I say that because, of course, it is striking that these discussions, these contacts by these anonymous US officials to the Financial Times happened at roughly the same time that President Biden was picking up the telephone and calling Xi Jinping. Some people in the US government are clearly and obviously extremely unhappy about any moves to end the tensions, the conflicts with China, and are therefore busy briefing the media about the fact that the US government is going to actually agree to Taiwan's request to rename its mission to Washington the Taiwan Representative Office, even though they know perfectly well that this is going to be something that will enrage Beijing and which would make US-China relations take a further spiral downward. Now, we're all very familiar with this from the days of the Trump administration, of Donald Trump trying to make moves to improve relations with Russia. For example, meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in the Oval Office, only to have anonymous officials briefing that he had in some way compromised US national security by doing so, and things like that. And now we see exactly the same thing being done to the Biden administration, to President Biden himself. And we learn who is behind these moves. And we learn that what we hear, for example, the key paragraph is Kurt Campbell, White House Asia advisor, has backed the change, according to two people with knowledge of the discussions. One said the request had wide support inside the National Security Council and from State Department Asia officials. So the briefing is clearly coming from the National Security Council and from the State Department, and particularly from the Asia officials within the State Department. And by the way, it's become absolutely clear as crystal to me over the last couple of years that the number of neocons that are the result of the Bush-Cheney era, perpetuated by the Obama era, is that neocon officials have obtained an absolute iron grip on the State Department. It has proved impossible so far to winkle them out, and they are working extremely hard to undermine any move for a rapprochement either towards Russia or China, and are seeking always to box in the United States into taking the most confrontational line possible with both of those two countries. And it's also clear as well that the National Security Council is also essentially captured by the neocon tendency within the US government. Well, nobody should be any doubts about this. The Chinese, if this thing actually happens, if the Taiwan's mission to the United States is indeed allowed to change its name to Taiwan Representative Office. In other words, if it becomes in effect something that is to all intents and purposes an embassy paving the day for the United States to recognize Taiwan's independence, nobody should be any doubt that at that point any improvement in relations between the United States and China, such as President Biden weekly tried to achieve in that telephone call with Xi Jinping, well, that is something that is simply not going to happen. The Chinese will react extremely strongly to what they will see as an attempt by the United States or by certain officials in the United States to undermine the One China policy. So we had on the telephone Biden reassuring Xi Jinping that the United States will abide by the One China policy, and US officials taking steps which Beijing will simultaneously see as undermining the One China policy. And already there has been a strong Chinese reaction, and it has taken the form of a thunderous editorial in Global Times, which I will read, at least in part. And it reads as follows: "Teach the US Taiwan Island a real lesson if they call it." And it goes on to say, according to British newspaper The Financial Times, on Saturday, Washington is seriously considering a request from the island of Taiwan to change the name of its mission in the United States capital from Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office to Taiwan Representative Office. It is also reported that White House Asia advisor Kurt Campbell has backed the request. Washington is assessing the risks such a change would bring. The report has caused strong repercussions in the island, but neither the US government nor the Taiwan authorities have commented on the report. Reports also said senior national security officials from the US and the island of Taiwan held face-to-face talks on Friday in Annapolis, Maryland, which is less than an hour's drive from Washington, D.C. That is a very sensitive issue for the Chinese because the fact that national security officials from the United States and Taiwan are meeting and holding face-to-face talks in the United States, just an hour's drive from Washington, is again a clear sign of coordination between the United States and what the United States is in effect treating as the government of Taiwan. And Beijing Global Times goes on to say, the two pieces of news were revealed immediately following reports about a phone conversation between the Chinese and the US heads of state. And so the Chinese are, of course, able to make the same conclusions as I can, that either there are officials in the United States government busy undermining the US president's policies and the US president's conversations with his Chinese counterpart, and there will be some hardline officials within the Chinese government, they will say that Biden, when he gave Xi Jinping reassurances about Taiwan, he was actually being duplicitous. He didn't mean what he was saying because simultaneously his officials were busy negotiating with Taiwan and the government of Taiwan to take one step towards official recognition of Taiwan as a sovereign country. Well, Global Times then goes on to say the following. It must be pointed out that if the United States and the island of Taiwan do make name changes, it will mean Washington's basic abandonment of its one China policy, which will constitute a significant change surrounding the Taiwan question. Lithuania previously said it would set up an office in the Taiwan island with the name Taiwan Representative Office, and the island also announced its plan to set up an office in Lithuania using the same name. This has met strong resistance from the Chinese mainland. If the US does the same, without doubt it will have a widespread demonstration effect on its allies and bring about a wave of name changes of the island's missions in these countries. The US knows well it's a significant and serious matter. It is leaking certain information to test the Chinese mainland's response. But is there really anything to test? The Chinese mainland has no other choice but to take the challenge and prepare for a showdown with the United States if it pushes the matter to the tipping point of a showdown. Should the United States rename the island's mission in Washington as Taiwan Representative Office, the Chinese mainland should respond to it in a punitive way, no lighter than it did with Lithuania. At that time, it's anticipated that China will recall its ambassador to the United States, and it is likely the lowest diplomatic reaction. Otherwise, China cannot set up its prestige on the one China principle as it has always been upholding. Due to US incitement and instigation, some Western countries are itching to play the Taiwan card. Punishing only small countries while ignoring the major powers won't work. Safeguarding the bottom line of the One China principle means we have to deter the US attempt to cross the line. Otherwise, we will have to face the possibility of more Taiwan representative offices emerging in a batch of capital cities. Diplomatic measures alone are obviously not enough. If the United States and Taiwan Island change the names, they are suspected of touching the red line of China's anti-secession law, and the Chinese mainland will have to take severe economic and military measures to combat the arrogance of the United States and the island of Taiwan. At that time, the mainland should impose severe economic sanctions on the island and even carry out an economic blockade of the island, depending on the circumstances. Militarily, Chinese mainland's fighter jets should fly over the island of Taiwan and place the island's airspace into the patrol area of the People's Liberation Army. This is a step that the mainland must take sooner or later. The name change provides the Chinese mainland with sufficient reason to strengthen our sovereign claim over the island of Taiwan. It is anticipated that the Taiwan army will not dare to stop the PLA fighter jets from flying over the island. If the Taiwan side dares to open fire, the Chinese mainland will not hesitate to give Taiwan independence forces a decisive and destructive blow. More importantly, if the Chinese mainland turns a blind eye to the United States and Taiwan Island, this time they will definitely go further in the next step. According to reports, Joseph Wu, leader of the external affairs of the Taiwan Island, participated in the talks between senior security officials from the United States and the island in Annapolis on Friday. Next time they may publicly hold the meeting, even in the US State Department in Washington, D.C. As the United States will hold the Summit for Democracy by the end of this year, if we do not contain the insolence of the US and the Taiwan Island, Washington might even really invite Tsai Ing-wen to participate in the summit. That is the president of the government of Taiwan. It will be much worse in nature than former Taiwan regional leader Li Tenghui's visit to US as an alumnus in 1995. Will peace come if the Chinese mainland puts up with all this and swallows its anger for the sake of peace? If the mainland doesn't strike back decisively, US warships will dock at the island of Taiwan, its fighter aircraft will land on the island, and its troops may be stationed in the island again. At that time, where will China's prestige be as a great power? How can a country maintain its system of defending its interests on the international stage? The fact is, a contest of wills has been formed regarding the Taiwan question. Since China has declared that the Taiwan question is a matter of our core interests, we must take resolute actions to protect the bottom line of this exact national interest at any cost. If the Democratic Progress Party Authority really dares to take the risk of triggering a war to push for a name change, and the US, which just suffered a debacle in Afghanistan, is not afraid of being involved in a new war, then what is there for the mainland to be scared of? It seems that sooner or later, the Taiwan Straits will be plunged into a storm that will change the situation drastically. And judging from the current actions of the US and the island of Taiwan, we can be sure that even if they will have to take this step back, they will step forth again soon. Thus, right now, we need to be fully prepared to blow them out of the water in the Taiwan Straits. The US has been engaging in phrase-mongering, hoping that the competition between China and the US will not evolve into a conflict. We will have to tell them clearly with our actions that competition with the Chinese mainland on the Taiwan question is bound to turn into a serious conflict, and there is absolutely no room for maneuver. So there it is. If the United States starts to make moves towards upgrading Taiwan's office in Washington to a Taiwan representative office, China will react. It will recall its ambassador from Washington. It will impose an economic and trade embargo on Taiwan. It will send its fighter jets to overfly the island of Taiwan itself. And if the Taiwanese Air Force tries to respond, it will attack the Taiwan Air Force and any air defense installations located in Taiwan itself. And if the United States tries to interfere, it has a fight with China on its hands. And as far as China is concerned, this is an absolutely critical red line, and China will not back down. If it does, if it allows things to continue as they are, then the United States will move step by step towards a recognition of Taiwan as an independent country. Other states will follow, and sooner or later, the Chinese will find themselves humiliated and in a state of disadvantage, with the United States sending troops and perhaps even nuclear weapons, that's not mentioned, to Taiwan itself to defend the island. So if the United States takes this fatal step of upgrading the title of Taiwan's office in Washington to Taiwan Representative Office, well, at that point, China has no choice but to react, and to react strongly, and to take the various steps that Global Times has indicated. So there we go. Very clear words from China. And by the way, it's now clear, and undoubtedly the Chinese are right in thinking so, that Lithuania's earlier decision to upgrade the name of China's legation in Lithuania to Taiwan Representative Office was one coordinated and possibly even instigated by the neocons in Washington, the same people who are holding these talks with the Taiwanese in Annapolis and who are leaking this information to the media in a clear effort, as far as I'm concerned, to undermine the attempts by Joe Biden to calm things down with Beijing. Well, the Russians have been saying for a long time that the United States is agreement incapable, that any promise made by the United States president over the telephone or in a summit is of no value, because as soon as the president returns to Washington or as soon as the telephone is put down, the officials in the United States and the State Department, the National Security Council, and in the Pentagon, and in that vast body of think tanks and NGOs that are absolutely part of the US foreign policy establishment, all of those people will be working overtime to undermine any policy and any agreement that the president makes. So it is pointless negotiating with the United States anymore, because doing so is ultimately going to result in an agreement without any value. Or almost as soon as that agreement is reached, the more powerful people in Washington, the deep state, the blob, or as I prefer to call it, the Borg, will go ahead and will work to undermine it, because as far as it is concerned, the only policy it knows is one of confrontation, be it with Russia, be it with China, be it with Iran, or wherever. And the Russians have learnt that lesson, and the Chinese are in the process of learning it too. So it's already, I think, becoming clear that that telephone call between Biden and Xi that took place just a few days ago is already being its effect is already being negated. Moreover, we are starting to see, as a result of all of this, the kind of steps that the Chinese would take if the United States and its allies were to press ahead with the policies that they've been talking about with respect to Taiwan. The Chinese will recall their ambassador from Washington. They will impose economic sanctions and perhaps even a blockade on Taiwan. And they will start to move their military even closer towards Taiwan. They will start to overfly the island with their fighter jets. They will threaten military action if those fighter jets are interfered with. And to be straightforward about it, if they're going to start flying their fighter jets over the island, I think it is only a question of time, perhaps a very short time, before they impose a no-fly zone over Taiwan. And they have the means to enforce it. And if the United States and its Navy tries to interfere, it has a fight on its hands, and Global Times is talking about blowing the United States out of the water. That was what the Global Times article said. So, in other words, a war, an armed conflict in the Taiwan Straits and over the island of Taiwan, something which Joe Biden and his other set of advisors, presumably including some of the wiser heads in the Pentagon, have been becoming increasingly alarmed about and are trying to stop. Now, I think part of the problem here is that I think that this very powerful neocon tendency within the United States government, the people who I talked about in the State Department, in the National Security Council, and in the think tank community, I think that they believe that the Chinese are bluffing. And I think they also think that if they call the Chinese bluff, China will be humiliated, Xi Jinping will be humiliated, and at that point, the United States will have scored a decisive win over China. It's the continuous mistake that the neocons always make. They always underestimate the resolve of the other side. They've done that with respect to Iran and in Afghanistan and in Syria. They've done that with Russia in Ukraine. And now it seems to me that they're doing it also with China over Taiwan. Because I don't think what the Chinese are saying is any sort of bluff. I think that the Chinese understand perfectly well the high stakes in this game, and I think that the Chinese will indeed react every bit as strongly as they're saying they will. I understand that some US officials have indeed been dismayed by the strong Chinese reactions to the that have been expressed when low-ranking officials, people like Tony Blinken and Wendy Sherman, have attempted to hold talks with Chinese officials like Wang Yi. And part of the reason for organizing or arranging that call between Biden and Xi Jinping was that those same officials were hoping that Biden would be able to cut through and would be able to talk directly to Xi Jinping and would find that Xi Jinping was more amenable to talk and discussion than those lower-ranking officials were. But the fact is that it is the United States itself which is failing to understand that those lower-ranking officials, Wang Yi and Yang Jiechi and all these other people in China, who the United States is finding so difficult to deal with, are representative of the consensus within China. The Chinese will not back down any more than the North Koreans, the Russians, the Iranians, the Syrians, or the Taliban have done on what they regard as their core interests. And unless the United States understands that, then it will find itself in another war brought about by a neocon miscalculation. This article, this editorial, shows the damage which has already been done. The Chinese are obviously furious at the way in which they feel that the President of the United States has said one thing to them over the phone and other US officials have been doing the opposite. I understand that the Russians were equally angry when Biden, on the one hand, telephoned Putin in April at the height of the Ukrainian crisis, while simultaneously other officials in the US government were unrolling further sanctions against Russia in a way that clearly seemed to signal that the president himself and the conciliatory moves the president appeared to be making was going to be undermined. If the United States wants to destroy trust in itself, wants to convince its interlocutors in Beijing and Moscow, and also in other capitals, that the US simply cannot be trusted, that it is unreliable, that at the end of the day, any move on the part of the United States towards conciliation is not to be counted upon, and that the entire trajectory of US policy is towards confrontation, then it is going about things in the right way. Either way, it's clear to me that a lot of the impact of that telephone conversation between Biden and Xi Jinping has now been undone. It's been undone deliberately, and we are once more in a confrontation situation between China and the United States over Taiwan, with the Chinese now openly talking about recalling their ambassador, taking military action with respect to Taiwan, and threatening to blow the United States Navy out of the sea. Well, a good day's work by the neocons, and a further illustration of how the United States government has now become completely dysfunctional and is incapable of conducting its foreign policy efficiently. I can remember when it was otherwise. I can remember just when Lyndon Johnson met with Alexei Kosygin in Glassboro in 1967, and that paved the way for the whole process which became known as détente. I can also remember the day when, or rather the days, when Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger were able to talk to both the Soviets and the Chinese, establishing contact with the Chinese, agreeing arms control treaties with the Russians, and doing so as undisputed leaders of a united government. The United States no longer has a united government any longer. And as everybody knows, a government so affected by factionalism, so divided against itself, is to all intents and purposes, at least in the foreign policy sphere, no sort of government at all. Well, thank you for joining me for this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my friend Alex Cristoforo. Please also check out Alex's channel. You find links under this video. Please also check us out on our other platforms. Above all, Locals, where we have a thriving community and where we are posting exclusive content, and where also we shall be enhancing our presence continuously and all the time. And also particularly look us up on the new free speech platform, SuperU, where we also have an active presence. And of course, we're also present on other platforms like BitChute, Library, ODYSEE as well. And if you want to support us, you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, links under this video. And of course, also remember to go to our shop, look up the wonderful things that you will find there, our amazing magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, and all the rest. And last but not least, If you've liked this program, please remember to tick the like button to this video and also to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today, and I look forward to you joining me again soon, and have a wonderful day until then.